Thank you all for coming to my session. This session is about talking less and merging more. There's been a lot of talk over the last two and a half years around AI and AI agents. And for me, I spent 5 years at GitHub, and one of the projects I worked on with a really good friend of mine named Brandon Keepers at GitHub was something called Probot. Anybody here ever heard of Probot? Right, a few people. So Probot was really cool because what it allowed us to be able to do is you ran this little container or application, and what it would do is it would listen to webhook events from GitHub, and then you could write JavaScript code, and you could interact with the GitHub API to be able to go ahead and modify things. Well, there were some issues, and one of the big issues that we would run into is, there was probably about 350 webhook events that you could listen to, and if you wanted to listen to a lot of them, you would have to run a lot of probots, and that wasn't really tangible for a lot of platform engineers. They didn't want to run a whole bunch of probot instances and things like that. So I thought about this talk, and I was like, how could I merge probot and AI and also GitLab? So that's sort of where the genesis of this conversation that I want to have today is about how do we merge the three of these. And I'm going to focus a lot on best practices for where and how should we be using AI in our traditional workflows. Been talking to, my role at GitLab is a field CTO, so I spend a lot of time talking to executives. And I joke with people because what I saw 2 years ago was a CIO, a CTO, a chief digital officer. It was, we have an AI first strategy and everything's got to be AI and go, 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 go. And what was GitLab's story around AI? And today's story is, yeah, AI is interesting, but tell me, what's the business proposition that you're trying to solve? And how does your AI meet into solving that business problem? And so this has been the quickest time in my career, and I've been in the IT industry for 30 years. This is the quickest I've seen executives go from, I'm all in, go, 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 150 miles an hour, to switching on a dime and being able to talk about, I need to know what the value prop is, what's the return on investment. So when I think about this particular project, I didn't want to steal the Probot name. It's actually been trademarked by GitHub, so I couldn't use Probot. So I'm calling this the GitLab Sidecar. So a lot of people who run GitLab, whether you're an open source user of GitLab or you're a self-managed GitLab user, or even if you're a SaaS user, this is something that could just be deployed as a container into a Kubernetes environment. You could run it natively on a VM, wherever you wanted to put it. But the goal is to be able to have a way for you to think about this difficult issue of how do I listen for different webhook events from GitLab to be able to use GitLab more as an orchestration engine for your developer workflows than just thinking about, how do I build a CI pipeline to attach to a post push hook that's happening on the back end. And this is something I hear from a lot of customers is, well, we want to build automations for how we do issue triage, or I want to be able to automate the generation of my release documentation. Or I've got a CI job and I've got a log that fails and I'd like to be able to know how I can remediate that particular job. So when we think about the complexity is architecturally what we want to be able to have is we need to have a listener, a webhook listener, and then we need to have a router, and that router needs to be able to know about what kinds of hooks are available to it. And then it needs to be able to find that right hook and then go execute. And instead of just executing a native API call, what I'm doing is I'm going to mix in AI. So we can give it natural language. So I can give it something like, hey, when you see a new issue opened, can you just, if it's got something that looks like a bug, could you just add a needs triage label to it, right? Natural language, something really easy. You don't have to worry about what are all the different JSON fields that you need to fill out and do all those things. Now, the big thing that I'm going to hear from a lot of people is that from this GitLab Sidecar project is, well, doesn't MCP solve this? Can I just use MCP to be able to call GitLab? Well, the CISOs that I talk to right now do not like MCP because the tools inside of MCP don't always map one-to-one to different APIs. So they will tell you that, oh, by the way, here's the MCP tool that we want to be able to use, and this MCP tool, out of the 20 that you're exposing, we're going to let you use 3 of them. But that might not be the 3 that you want. So there's a very popular open source project called GitBeaker that already has the APIs abstracted out in Node.js. So most CISOs are going to be like, oh, yeah, we know about GitBeaker. It's just an API wrapper around GitLab, and you can either use OAuth 2 or you could use a personal access token, and those are already approved ways for us to be able to communicate with GitLab. So they're good with that. So that's where I'm defaulting back to is, well, let's think about how we can use this model to be able to go back and interact with GitLab using already existing tools that have been approved. So when we think about all the different APIs that we can interact with, we need to think about what sort of autonomous AI agents would we want to build to be able to stub out the code for us around it. So, oh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm good. All right, sorry. No worries. So, how many people here have built their own AI agents? Cool, few people. So, I have learned a lot about AI agents over the last 18 months. And there's a lot of things that a lot of people are really concerned. They're like, oh, you know what, AI is going to, every software developer is going to go away and we're not going to need software developers anymore. I actually argue that point and say, we actually going to need more software engineers. What I'm not going to need is I'm not going to need people who are, I'm going to need like core software engineers, computer scientists, people who understand architecture, understand patterns, understand how to properly architect things for large-scale deployments, large-scale distribution. So when we think about agents and we think about how they interact and the inference engine that's behind it, what you need to think about is the first time an agent calls out to an LLM and it gets a response, it may not be a good response. So how do we build an architecture to think about, well, let me get 5 responses, and then what I can do is I can look at those 5 and figure out which one of those 5 is best. Let the agent figure that out for me. So that's where multi-turn reasoning comes in. So when we think about architectures inside of different agents, we've got our webhook event verification, we've got a multi-turn AI reasoning loop. We then want transactional guarantees. This is one of the other things. If you've used anything in AI, there's this wonderful thing called hallucinations. Has anybody here had an AI hallucinate for you, right? It's wonderful when it does it, especially when you are the expert in the field and you see it give you something back and you're like, I know that's wrong. But we've all been there 11 o'clock at night vibe coding and it gives us something and all of a sudden it's been a little long day and maybe you've had 1 or 2 drinks in the evening and you're kind of like, maybe I'm wrong, right? So what we want to be able to do is we need to have transactional guarantees. So when you start to think about these workflows that you might build in using AI, what happens if you've got a 5-step orchestration, but the 3rd step fails or the 3rd step hallucinates? There's a really interesting study from a group in Singapore that when it hallucinates up front, if it hallucinates in agent 1 and you've got 4 more agents, what comes out at the end will be unrecognizable. And it's because it's iterating over the inference of what it is already hallucinated in, but it thinks the hallucination is actually correct. So think about that. It's like somebody telling, I've got 2 daughters, they're now grown up, but anybody here who has a young kid, and they realize they've been caught in a lie, so they just continue to lie on top of the lie in hopes that if I just keep talking to you and keep telling you lies, eventually I will win and you'll just give up because you won't know which one of those lies might be true in the middle. So those are the kinds of things that I see with AI. But we want to make sure that our workflows are transactional and that we have compensating transactions if something goes wrong. So in step 3, if I realize that it's gone off sideways and gone off the rails, I can go ahead and undo steps 2 and 1. Now this is really hard in a transactional system, something like GitLab. Like, what if I wanted it to go create a merge request for me? Do I close the merge request? Because there's no such thing as deleting a merge request. So what are the compensating transactions? Well, maybe I might have something that creates a comment or a note, and it says that we need somebody to come back in and review this, and we might need to enhance it. But then that's where I bring in a human in the loop. To be able to then, I need to have an agent then notify somebody and say, I'm letting you know we went off sideways and I'm now in a merge request and I need somebody to come help me undo what was bad. So technical integration and API usage. Now this is where it's going to get very interesting because I am no longer going to be in PowerPoint. We're going to try to do this live. Now I have a project. So anybody here, so knowing that this is being recorded, let's see here, it is, let's see if it catches up here. Oh, you know what I probably need to do? Let's do this. All right, so I know it might be hard to read here for you guys. Let me see if I can blow this up. So I've exposed this. I've done many all things open presentations. So I have a root group in GitLab called Honeydue, which is HONEYDUE. And then inside of there, there's an all things open group. And then I've got a bunch of projects in there. And the GitLab Sidecar is one of the projects in there. But what I did for everybody is I had AI because it's been working with me as I go through and build out this project. It was really nice, and it summarized my entire talk for me, and I've got my all things open demo guide. So anybody who wants to go back through and be like, I want to redo everything that Lee did in his talk, you can just open up this project, copy and paste a bunch of stuff, and go through and actually have this do the exact same thing for you. Has all the directions how to set it up, all of those things, so you can just walk through this demo yourself. Now, anybody here, I'm really curious, how many of you know what IDE this is? Anybody? No, not Cursor. Not VS Code. Not a VS Code fan. So this is an IDE called Zed. Anybody here heard of Zed? Yes, got a few people raising hands. I'm going around promoting as much as I can. This is a bunch of friends of mine who worked at GitHub with me, and they built Atom. Anybody here remember Atom from the GitHub days? So this is Atom written in Rust. So it is super fast. And it takes up 10% of the memory utilization that VS Code takes up. So inside of here on the left-hand side, it is probably hard to read, but what I have here is I have folders that there's specs. So who here has heard about spec-driven development? Anybody here? Cool, few people. So spec-driven development is, think about things like when you have a really well-formed API and you know what the JSON schema should be. So you can give it that JSON schema, have the AI read the schema, and ask it to adhere its output directly to that schema. It's very powerful. What's even more powerful is when we talk about doing things like having workflows where I have schema to schema to schema type workflows. Because now I can have multiple different agents and I can teach it each agent specifically how to interpret each one of their own individual specs. So let's think about if I was building an API or a webhook listener inside of GitLab, what would I have to have? Well, I would have to have an event listener, and that event listener would have to understand the general GitLab schema for a webhook. So that's spec 1. I don't need it to be specific, I just need it to be general. Then what I need is, once it reads that schema, there will then be a header of the event type. So issue, open. So those two things on the open, I then have a state that I'm monitoring. So that is a different spec, because when I get an opened webhook, it is a very specific event that I've received. So I then need to generate code off of that spec to be able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and show, this is the general handler spec that says I need to capture the general GitLab webhook event type. So that's step 1. And then step 2 understands that webhook event type, and it's looking for one of these events. So it's really cool when you take any sort of AI and you give it a URL that has, like, GitLab has phenomenal documentation. So you go and you feed in that documentation page and say, I want you to read what the specification is and build me a handler and a spec for that handler, and then specific for every single one of the different event types. So if I go through, and now that I have these two general templates, I then have, inside of here, I'll use Claude Code. So here, I've got the resource. So here we can see that we've got an issue. And here we have the state, which is opened. And here is, I want to act as a GitLab webhook developer agent. And here is what my prompt looks like. Now, this prompt is something that you wouldn't normally just sit there as you're vibe coding something on the weekend. This is very specific and very well defined, because it's going to run multiple times, and you want it to repeat that action, because when we talk about doing the multi-turn transactionality of the agents, we want the output to look as common across all outputs. So that way it can look at previous ones where maybe we've edited it, and it can come back and be like, yeah, the one that we got back doesn't look like the one that we have as our reference. And then if we look at the agent itself, here we have a role, we've got knowledge, we've got examples. Now, how many of you, as you've been vibe coding, how many of your prompts, when you're interacting, have this level of detail in it? Right? It doesn't have that. This is why we build agents, is because my degree is in education, and I love building these things because it's like I'm teaching somebody in school. I'm teaching it how to learn about how to build the system that I want. So all of this is in this project. So you guys have access to this project. You guys can go back in, play with it, try it out. But now as I go through, so now that we've got our spec, we've got our spec-driven design, we've got our agent, which is here, and then we've got an example prompt for what we will actually pass in once the spec's been created. So here we go. Who's ready? So I'm going to go in because my prompt is, okay. So I do not have one in here. So here we see that we've got the issues spec, and we've got the open JSON. So I am going to take this user prompt, and I'm asking it to pull in all of the information. Oh, first I need, let's see here. Yeah, making sure this is the right one. Okay, so this is the first one we need to do. So just to show, I am not going to use, a lot of people, I'm not going to use GitLab's AI here, because some of you may not have access to GitLab's AI. You could do things with Duo, But I want to show you, like, you could use Gemini CLI, you could use Codex, you could use Claude Code. That's what I'm using here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in that prompt into Claude Code. So we're going to hope the internet holds up for us long enough for this to run. See if I can bring this up. So when you go ahead and you're running your own prompts, look at the amount of work that it is doing up front. So because of all the information I gave it, it's now going to ask me, hey, it needs to go to GitLab to be able to pull the information. So I'm going to say, yes, please go to GitLab to pull the information so it can understand what the merge request values are. And it's getting all of this data, and it takes a while. Like, a lot of times when we're vibe coding, we're getting instant responses because we're giving it small little iterative actions. When we're doing agents like this, we have to give it so much information up front because part of the goal of this is to walk away from it. Like, it should go off and do its work and come back. So imagine a world, and John Coughlin, who runs our DevRel team, we were talking about this earlier, imagine a world where your IDE is no longer your IDE. Imagine each one of those panes that's in your IDE has agents that it knows is working in the background. And as those agents complete or they need more information, it's almost like its own personal Slack. And you've got little channels where you're interacting with each one of these different agents. And it's writing the code for you. It's asking you to review code. Oh, I've got a CI job that just kicked off. And it's going around and it's making all these changes. So now it's saying, hey, I want to let you know, it's got the information. It wants to create an open JSON spec. So now it's going to go off, and it's taking that information. Now, I could tell it, like, because of the way that I wrote the prompt, it's asking me, so I can give you a live demo so you can see what it's doing. But I could tell it, I want you to be completely automated and trust every information. You go do everything on your own. So as it's doing this, it's going out there and it's talking to Anthropic, and it's using Claude and the LLMs behind it, and it's taking all this information. Now it's showing me the diffs, the information. And what's going to do is it's going to keep working through all of these changes until eventually it's going to have for me on the left-hand side where we had issues. Let's see if it created for me the proper, oh, look at this. In the specs on the left-hand side, it has created an opened specification now for a merge request. So this is really interesting. I just had a spec create another spec, so that way that spec can be used to actually generate the code to be able to create the handler and the webhook prompts to be able to interact with GitLab. Okay, so here it's now telling me what we've done. It's created the specification. It's mapping the GitLab events, merge request hook, and it's created, defines 5 actions. So we've got MR list. So if we actually look at that particular spec, so when a merge request is open, analyze the changes and automatically assign appropriate labels based on branch naming conventions, suggest reviewers based on file changes, and welcome first-time contributors. How cool would that be? If that's what you had that automatically. Hey, you've got a new engineer who just joined your company and they open up their first merge request. Hey, Sally, welcome to the team. Glad you opened up your first merge request. Can't wait to see what you do at the company. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So now you've got this agent that's now acting on your behalf, and it's going through and using that spec, and we can see all of the information over here for what it's going to do. So now what we're going to do is we got to go back to our demo. So now we did the first one. And let's see, now let's run the second one. Trying to get this a little bit quicker here so we don't run out of time. So now I've got a second prompt because I need to use that spec, and I now need to use my specialty agent to use that spec So now it's going to go off and using the agent that we defined and the prompt, so this is basically a copy of that prompt. And you notice in Markdown, if you've ever been in GitHub or in GitLab using Markdown with the little boxes, it has little check marks. So what it'll do is those are tasks that I'm telling it to do. I want you to do each one of these tasks. And then what it will do is it's going to iterate through and make sure that it has completed each one of those tasks as it goes through. So again, if I was doing this and I tried to automate this, now I do have, there's something else called Claude Flow. And with Claude Flow, what you can do is you make all of this completely autonomous. I had built another project, but I didn't want to give you guys, I wanted to give you guys just sort of the core framework. So I built it and I let it go off and run. It ran for about 4 hours and it consumed every webhook from GitLab. So after 4 hours, it built all of the code. Now, this is the part that gets really scary. So imagine you're in a Git branch, and you've now had all this code get written for 4 hours, and you come back. It created over 180 files, and it added almost 18,000 lines of code. Who wants to do that code review? Right. So as you start to think about these things, there's going to need to be a way. This is where I was talking about. Now imagine that control plane layer where you're in your IDE and it gets to a certain point and it goes, hey, I want to let you know that I've written about 100 lines of code and I've created your handlers. Do you want to go ahead and do a review? But let's say that review isn't necessarily happening in GitLab, or that review is not happening inside of GitHub. You're reviewing that locally inside your IDE, but the agent is interacting with you through that review process, that on the back end, that agent will call the APIs in those services to automatically document the review after you've done it inside your IDE. Man, what a powerful model that would be. Or what if, even better yet, you were doing that locally and it cached it because you were disconnected or you were remote in a location where you had really bad cell service, and all of a sudden it came back and all of a sudden there was connectivity, and then uploaded all of the data. The agents knew about all this change that was done and just uploads all of that directly for you to the API to be able to show you all the reviews that were done. Those are the kinds of things that we're starting to see with AI. It is not perfect. I have another demo that I give that is really, it's more of a snarky take on AI, where we go through and we have issues with, is it actually doing what we want it to do? What if I've already written really good code? I don't want you to modify it. So this kind of stuff, AI is great for. It's very pattern driven. It knows about the pattern. I'm able to create specs for it. I'm starting from scratch. It doesn't need to integrate with anything else. This is just me doing this by myself. This is where AI is great, starting from scratch. But I can tell you, this gets to about 100,000 lines of code. We'll get some hallucinations start to pop in. It's going to start to try to read things and start to infer what's going on. So let me continue this on. Let me see if I can. So the way that this would work inside your project is, so here I've got the webhook sidecar. And if I go in and look at my settings, and I go to the webhooks, what you would have to do is you would have to register the webhook. So because I'm running on my local laptop, what I did is I'm using something called ngrok. So ngrok is sort of like a reverse proxy. So it runs out in the cloud, and then it creates a tunnel to my local machine. And then when I start up the server locally for me, it will go ahead and it will route and be able to do everything locally. The way that I've got this set up right now is everything is disconnected. So we currently talk to Olama, and I'm using the GPT open source to be able to do it. But all of these things that I'm talking about, there's so many moving pieces. So if you're sitting there and let's say you get to a particular point, you're like, Lee, that presentation was amazing, which I hope you do. But I don't want to have to manage all of this. We've got a small team. We're using GitLab SaaS, and I really I just want it to work out of the box. Well, currently we are running an open beta of something that we call Duo Agent Platform. So you may have noticed on the left-hand side here where I have this thing called Automate. So inside the beta, we have these things called agents. So what I can do is I can create agents very similar to the way that we just defined an agent that would run inside the GitLab ecosystem. So if anybody here has ever created a GitLab pipeline and you've had a job in a GitLab CI pipeline, imagine instead of running a job in that pipeline inside that workflow, you're now running an AI agent. So now this all runs inside of the GitLab ecosystem. And so you can then stitch agents together and say, I want agent A to call agent B. And we are putting out example agent workflows already. So we've got some agent workflows that take us from issue to merge request, auto remediation of CI pipelines. We've got things around security vulnerability remediation. So as we think about this, a lot of the agents that we talk about right now go horizontally across the workflow, which is what I just described. The piece that gets really interesting is one of our engineers, if you get a chance and you're really itching to be able to dig in some really future stuff that's coming from GitLab, we've built a GitLab knowledge graph. And the GitLab knowledge graph now allows AI agents to look across projects. So now imagine you're a security engineer and you know that you've got a vulnerability across 100 projects. Well, how can I remediate all 100 at once? You could build one agent that interacts with a GitLab knowledge graph that can go look across every project inside of GitLab that knows that it has that vulnerability and automatically open up an MR, like we just did, to go ahead and auto-remediate that security vulnerability. So those are the kinds of things that if you don't want to build it yourself and you want to use GitLab, please contact your GitLab rep. It is in open beta right now on SaaS, so unfortunately you have to be a paying customer to be able to test some of these capabilities. We do have our Duo core capabilities that is free to any paying customer, but the beta for some of these agent workflows and stuff, you either have to be a premium or ultimate customer. But again, you could do what I just did and use this open source project, and you can also build it yourself and run it as another sidecar as part of your GitLab instance. So let's go back and let's see how far we've gotten. So it's now creating the merge request agent. This is the part that I actually want you guys to see. So inside of an agent, you have two pieces. You have your agent, you have your tools. So what it did is, if we look at the tools, here we can see all the merge request tools. So it knows about an MR list, so merge request list. It looks for this specific information. Here's what it can execute and automatically look for information. There's also other ones. There's a view for a specific one. These are the ones that get interesting. This is where like MCP gets in trouble. Like here I've got an MR update. Well, that means I'm actually going to be modifying GitLab. And this is where the security teams get really nervous. But because you're running this sidecar with a personal access token, I have traceability to the user who actually modified that particular account. So you could pass that in. If you're using OAuth, you could ask it to use OAuth and then automatically figure out who the user is. Or what we're doing with our agents is you could have service accounts. And that way you could have traceability to be able to know which agents are modifying what capabilities inside of GitLab. But I hope that you go out and take this project, and I'm really interested. Like, ping me on LinkedIn, put a post on X, show me what you built. I would love to see what you guys are able to create with this. And this is the thing that I love about these open source conferences is we get to go play and see what we can do and stand up a GitLab instance at home in your home lab and play around. So with that, thank you.